students, where are you all sitting?
Yeah.
In the back. There's a lot of space up here, so if you want to come closer so that you can actually look at Holden and Buck and Kevin when they're talking, you're welcome to do it, but you're also welcome to sit wherever you like. So anyway, it's great to have everybody here. If I don't know you, I'm Carol Folk, I'm the Chancellor here, and it's a real privilege to be here to introduce three people who really don't need an introduction. And unlike my friends who would then suddenly just sit down after that one, I'm going to give them one anyway. I'm going to start by introducing Holden, whose current title is the Provost and Rita Levi Malticini Distinguished Professor Professor of Medicine at Washington University. Everybody knows Holden here, and he is held in such regard by our university. I think I first met Holden just about 5.5 years ago when I was coming here and interviewing for this job. And I have to tell you that he has been an incredible chancellor model, someone for me to get to know. He's given me so much good advice, but most importantly, he has shared his love for this very special place in every single conversation that we've ever had. And that's something that is a real gift to someone coming into a community for the first time, that the person that you have the honor and privilege to follow loves the place so well. And I feel like I just want to say thank you. That's really true. And join me in thanking Holden, all of us. He's the author of Engines of Innovation, and together with Buck and so many others, really have set this university on such an incredible path of innovation and entrepreneurship. In fact, I get to come to the class here every year with Buck and teach all the students that are taking their first entrepreneurship class, and it's really a special treat. I feel like I get to share a lot with Holden. He, of course, is a chemist, and I'm a chemist's daughter, and I'm also a scientist. We both spent a lot of time in arts and sciences. He was Dean of Arts and Sciences. I have been Dean of Arts and Sciences for many years at Dartmouth before I came here. And I think that's something that you see all those pieces in this book. And that's one of the things I really love about it, that commitment to the arts and sciences, to the faculty and students, and to the future and the entrepreneurship that they all share. He also was the director of the Moorhead Planetarium and Science Center, and has done so many things here. And I just want to mention again how great it has been to be able to work with you, Holden, and Patty and their family. It's just a real treat. And it's also great to introduce Buck Goldstein, the Professor of Practice in the Department of Economics at UNC. Of course, we all know Buck, University Entrepreneur in Residence. He, too, the author of Engines of Innovation for both of them, now in its second edition. It has been a really strong influencer in all of higher education. And you can see that played out if you read the amazing things being said about this book by some pretty incredible people, including the past president of Stanford, when he lauds the entrepreneurial flavor of the book. It's kind of exciting to see that just this week, UNC Chapel Hill was selected as one of the tied for fourth, for best undergraduate entrepreneurship programs that many of you, including Kevin, who I'm going to introduce in a second, and Buck and Holden have such a big influence on. But it's interesting to see, sorry, I'm losing my voice. I'm not about to cry. It's just wavering a little bit. From Babson College, MIT are number 1 and number 2, and then Indiana, Bloomington, Cal Berkeley, Michigan, Ann Arbor, and UNC Chapel Hill are all tied for fourth. So we're in great company, and we're going to beat them all next year. So, it is great. It's really great to be here. And now, introduce Kevin Guskowitz, again, whom you all know very, very well, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, has been such a wonderful leader. Started in his position about the same time you started as the Associate Dean for Sciences, and now have moved into that position. And he has been working with the faculty on the development of the next stage of the curriculum. And again, I think all the things that you read in this book, we are so lucky to see so many of them being developed and thought about and challenged right here on campus with the help of so many of you who are in the audience. So it was great for me to have a chance to read it and to see what they're thinking as they push us to take our higher calling and bring it forward in the world. Kevin supervises the 16,000 undergraduates and 2,500 graduate students that we have in arts and sciences, 70 academic departments, curricular programs, centers, and institutes. I think we all know that it is really at the heart of Carolina for so many people. It is the first experience they ever have and the biggest opportunity they see in their life is when they come here and graduate in arts and sciences. He's the Keen and Distinguished Professor of Exercise and Sports Science and, of course, received a MacArthur Fellowship in 2011, been a faculty member here since 1995. The last thing I want to say is going to sound a little funny, but often when you read books about education, they're written by people who are finished doing it. You know, they've retired and they are sharing their wonderful insights. But what I love, really love about this book is it's written by two people that are still very much in the way of doing it. So this is absolutely a book that is about right now, and where we want to go tomorrow. So it's my pleasure to welcome them forward and have Kevin lead the discussion.
Okay, well, thank you all for being here, and I want to just remind you, although Warner's already told me, I think we have at least 15 or 16 questions that have already been submitted, that there's a QR code, I think that many of you, not all of you, were given when you walked in, and so you can send in, take a picture of that, and use that to text your questions in. We'll also have floating mics around the room throughout the talk, and so I'm going to get it started, and just want to ask Holden and Buck a little bit about how this is an extension, perhaps, of the Engines of Innovation book, which Chancellor Fold already mentioned, and what was the idea behind this, and was it an extension of that initiative?
Well, the 12th time that someone came up to one of us and said, "We loved your first book, and we couldn't agree with it more. We need to run the university like a business." Holden called and said, "We need to write another book." Because we didn't write or ever believe that we needed to run the university like a business, but we did believe that the university was something really, really special that was under siege, and that we really did need to write a book about how people can come together to make a difference. So it was in reaction to a misconception, and I really was very reluctant, but Holden's other comment was, just hit return, and we'll have a book.
You got to do it a few times, but yeah.
Great. Well, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that or
No, I think that our first book was about how, in particular, how universities are special and how businesses are very different. And so when the university needs to accomplish something that's better done by a business, it's better to transfer it out and let a business do that. And so, certainly that was something that we wanted to highlight. But first of all, I just want to say, Kevin, thank you for everything you're doing for the University of North Carolina. And Chancellor, thank you. I'm so proud that you're my Chancellor.
One more thank you to collectively, as I look around this audience, half the people in the seats have contributed to this book one way or the other, critically or supportively or convincing me to move here, or Tom Keene is the person who said you need to do this, and everyone else said don't do it because you're crazy, and Tom was right. And Kevin has probably read this book more than anyone other than us, and we owe him a great debt of gratitude for going over not just the ideas, but line by line. And so there's no one better to moderate this. He knows the book better than we do.
While we're on this, there's no one who contributed more than Marcy Ferris, though, because Buck and I were really struggling with the subtitle. And we kept talking about the bargain between American higher education and the public. And I said, Buck, if we're writing a book about how the university isn't a business, we can't use the word bargain. So we went back and forth and back and forth. about what it was going to be. And I said, we need to ask a humanist. And he said, well, as it happens, I'm on a car trip with Marcy and Bill Ferris. And 2 minutes later, we had the word partnership, which was exactly the right word. But,
That's a perfect segue into my next question.
yeah.
What is the partnership? What should the partnership be? And so for those of you that, well, most of you have seen it, but our higher column with the subtitle being Rebuilding the Partnership Between America and Its Colleges and Universities.
Yeah, so one of the things that we noticed when we started writing all of this out is that, and our great colleague Jonathan Cole, who was the provost at Columbia for a long time, wrote a book that inspired us. But there has long since been this agreement between higher education and the public about what each side can expect. And Kathy Davidson was at WashU earlier this week, and she gave a great talk about this. And she talked about 1860 as a time when a lot of things really, really changed in higher education. And of course, you know, she's done a lot more research on this than we have, so she had a very long list of things that all changed in a similar time period. But the one that we latched onto was the Morrill Act, which was the act where the land-grant colleges were formed by President Lincoln. And if you read through all of this history that goes all the way from the Morrill Act to the end of World War II, when federally funded science came along, and the GI Bill and the Pell Grant, there's this long arc where the United States has always believed in higher education, but it's been quite clear that there were a bunch of expectations that were there, that we would produce science in the national interest, that our graduates would be contributors to the economy, and certainly in 1945 that we would provide medical research, and these expectations were there. And Jonathan Cole in his book calls it an implied compact, because when we read that, I thought, well, yeah, we don't really talk about this, because on the other side of this partnership are those of us who believe that preserving the liberal arts is a timeless calling, and that tenure and academic freedom and shared governance are indispensable in how we do this. And we realize that these two audiences don't really get it explained to them as much as they deserve, that there's another side to this whole thing. So we set out about trying to lay out all the details that one would need to understand how this has evolved.
And that Marcy's partnership, it turned out to be the heart of this. What's different about this book, I think, is that it's built around this notion that there really is a partnership, but it's not clearly articulated, and our folks don't all really understand that with all the privileges we get are certain responsibilities, and we don't think the public totally understands what its responsibilities are. So our hope is to begin a conversation about this implied compact, as Jonathan called it. And we did say, we were stealing your idea, do you mind? He said, as long as you quote me and get to spell my name right, I don't mind if you steal my idea.
Yeah. And I think the other element of this was, you know, a lot of times when people write about this from one perspective or the other, they're blaming the other side. And we believe, for example, that, you know, neither side has not really had it explained to them what's being expected, which I think is, in a way, kind of a sign of disrespect. And so, you know, for example, when I was a faculty member, nobody sat me down and said, guess what, American higher education has made all these promises through the years, and you're on the hook to do all these things. They gave me my lab and told me when my class was, and you know, asked me to go do my thing. And so you know, we've never really been to the faculty and said, these are the things that when you and Carol go to Raleigh, you have to tell them we're going to do. And likewise, we've never explained to the outside world that we can't do, that all the things that they value that we do, that these principles that we have are indispensable parts of doing that. And so we just wanted to give it a try to see what would happen if we explained all of this.
So with increasing tuition and college debt exceeding in many cases credit card debt, some are asking, is college worth it? And how do you respond to that?
Well, we give a lot of facts and figures in the book as to, well, first of all, I mean, I don't think anyone will be surprised that we think a college education is a great thing for everybody. But we give a lot of facts and figures in the book as to why it is, even if you take the most pecuniary, objective, instrumentalist analysis that you can possibly take, that it's still worth it to have a college degree, even setting aside all the habits of mind of engaged citizens and all of those things that we value, because economically folks are better off any way you can measure it if they have a college degree. And then you put on top of that the principles that folks gain. But I think that a lot of the misconceptions out there, and it's very hard if you're in Carolina to understand this, where everybody here gets 100% of their need met, regardless of whether they're in-state or out-of-state. I mean, this is really the only institution that can do that in that way. I know UVA says they do, but I'd like to look at their numbers before I gave you credit for that. I know that's your alma mater. You know, and in the private, among private universities, it's only the very few at the very top that are meeting 100% of need. And so there's a lot of misconceptions out there about who pays. And again, in North Carolina, you don't see this, but where I live, it's actually more expensive for an in-state student to go to the University of Missouri or the University of Illinois if they're low income than it is for them to come to WashU. And you know, if that kind of fact can exist, then it just shows how complicated this is. And so the people who are saying that college isn't worth it don't really know all these nuances. We hope they'll read chapter 4 and get all that. But you know, we've got to do a better. We made two mistakes. One is we've made it all way too complicated, and the second is we haven't really done a very good job of explaining it to people.
Yeah, but I would add though, college is worth it if you graduate on time or roughly on time and with about as much debt as it would take to buy a car. It's probably not worth it. It's definitely not worth it if you don't finish. And in fact, people who come to college and don't finish are worse off than people who don't come at all. So if you come, and if you finish on time or roughly on time with a reasonable amount of debt, then it's definitely worth it. Unfortunately, there are a lot of students who fall in the other category. I mean, I think completion rate nationally is certainly below 50%. So that says over half the kids who start college don't finish, and that's really scary. Like many of the other issues in higher ed, we tend to argue about the things that we shouldn't be arguing about, and we ought to be focusing on things like completion rate, level of debt, and job readiness, I think. Because if you come to school and you spend $50,000 or $60,000 to be a, say, physical therapist, and your comp per year as a physical therapist is going to be $50,000 or $60,000 a year, it's sort of hard to make that work.
So taxpayers pay an awful lot for higher education, and we're proud to be one of those states that we're supported at a very high level. And what do the taxpayers and the public get in return? So it's flipping it from why go to college, but why pay for this great university that we're sitting in today?
Well, the big issue is probably for the public is two issues. One is workforce readiness, and if we aren't responsive to the new demographic, which is we're going to be by 2040 or 50, we're going to be majority minority. And we're still doing a terrible job educating non-white students. We're falling behind nationally in terms of just education levels. So one is just an educated workforce. And then of course the second is we all believe, and you three, Carol and Kevin and Holden, are living proof that impactful science and new knowledge does have huge implications and value. And if it's not going to be done on a college campus now, it's not like we have the old Kodak Bell Labs, or I mean the old private institutes are gone. I mean, we have to do that. And it's very rare that you hear people say we shouldn't be doing science, especially, and Holden and I laugh about this, when they're sick. No, our biggest critics of us and our campus and campus climate, if they get sick and need a good doctor, they are not asking what the political affiliation of that doctor is, or what they did last week on a sort of controversial issue. They want the very best doctor. So it takes resources to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we try to lay out, that there are things that are very easy to talk about when you're talking to alumni or policymakers, getting jobs for students, providing world-class health care, creating research that drives the economy. We believe all of those things are asked and answered, so that it's not possible to get people to say they're going to value universities so much that they're going to forget about wanting those things. It's a beautiful dream that everybody would just believe in a liberal arts education so much that we wouldn't have to use those things to make the case. But as we lay out in the book, using these things to make this case isn't something that Carol and I and a few other university administrators cooked up in the last few years. This is something that's been with us for at least 70 years, since the end of World War II. And our thesis is if we can make that case and get people to give us a little more time, then we can start explaining to them some of the things that we think are indispensable and important about higher education. But they're not going to do that if we just go to them cold. If we go and say, you know what, it really doesn't matter whether our students get jobs when they get out, or whether UNC hospital is better than another hospital. Let me tell you about how to get from Aeschylus to August Wilson. We love that, and we think that's really important to us. And if we want people to try to engage with us about that, we need to give them some of the things that they've been told by us and by our predecessors for 70 years that they can expect.
So I like chapter 5. Chapter 5 talked about faculty needing to become more engaged with the public. And one of my favorite books, besides this one of course, is called Academic Duty by Donald Kennedy. It's an older book, but former president of Stanford. And he writes about along with tenure and academic freedom comes a responsibility and academic duty that faculty have. So how can we, as you called for more of that in chapter 5, but yet faculty complain often that they're not rewarded. Tenure system doesn't reward that in a way that would incentivize them to become more actively engaged.
Well, chapter 5 also talks about why tenure and academic freedom and shared governance are so important. So I don't think you can extract those two, because what we're saying is we're willing to give everything we have to defending those principles. And we understand that we really only reward people. We'll always try to come up with new ways to do it better, but basically we only reward faculty for succeeding in research. But what we're trying to do is call to the sort of higher angels of our colleagues to help to get them to realize that our undertaking is under serious stress, and it's not going to survive if we don't recommit ourselves to great teaching, and also do what we can to help the public understand what it is that we're doing in these enormous buildings. You know, the public could understand what goes on in this room, but they can't really understand what goes on upstairs. And I was always like the kid, I'd love to explain them that by saying, well, yes, a few billion years ago there was this explosion, and then over time, you know, that the universe cooled off, and eventually we had matter, and pretty soon hydrogen sulfide got used up, and you know, by that point they're asleep. And so, you know, we need to be able to explain what we're doing, and not everybody's going to be well suited to that, but you know, there's an anecdote in the book. I was at the Council on Competitiveness meeting, and Carol was there too, and that's a gathering of people from university presidents and people from organized labor and corporations. Yes, that's who's there. It's an interesting crowd. But speaker got up and said, all right, the university administrators don't get to answer, name a living scientist. Okay, living scientist could have been anybody. Could have been a lot of the people sitting in the room. The labor and corporate people could not name anyone. So, you know, if we have all of these resources that we're spending on research, and some of the most sophisticated people in our society can't name one living scientist, then, you know, we're not doing our job in terms of making it accessible to people what we're doing. And so so for the people who are good at this, who want to do it, I would say, yes, we're not going to reward you as directly as we should, but we desperately need your help. And for their colleagues who say, well, this is all a waste of time and they shouldn't be wasting their time with this, we need to say, no, we really need their help on this, and we need you to give them your support.
So, Buck, why is commercialization so difficult in the university setting?
Well, I think it's getting easier than it used to. When I came here and we said entrepreneurship, I mean, it was like Kay thought we might need an armed guard. I mean, because honestly, what people thought was entrepreneurship was a code word, I'll be really blatant, about a bunch of white guys coming to take over the university and tell everybody what to do. A bunch of business guys who had no idea about it. And so we've come a long way in 15 years, and we have now scientists who want to spin out companies, and it's almost a badge of honor now in the chemistry department to have a company. So, I mean, that's a big difference than it was, and you've seen that in your career. I think some of the difficulty is actually healthy because it has to do with conflict of interest and the fact that if we become just an arm of industry, then we've lost the special sauce. The special sauce that makes us not, because if people wanted to work for an arm of industry, they would go work for an industry. And you know, you and I have had this conversation, you personally, and you said, I'm not doing that. I'm going to stay here because this is what I really believe in. So I think the line we walk, the fact that it's somewhat difficult is not all bad, because that makes us different and special, and it makes people like you and Carol and Holden want to be here. And if we make it too easy, then we just look like another arm of General Electric or fill in the blank. Now, Holden's thought a lot about this, so you may have other...
Well, yeah, I mean, there are very detailed things. We go through some of them, but even more detailed about how we go about forming corporations that are spun out of the university and how we get them funded and what forms we have to fill out and all the committees that we have to do. And, you know, industry gets very frustrated with that in the process, that we have to go to all that trouble. But we're trying to protect all the things that, you know, we talk about as being so important to us in terms of free inquiry and students being able to pursue their education the way they want to pursue it. And so that's part of why it's as difficult as it is. It's incumbent on us as administrators to try to make it easier, because it's the karma that comes when industry criticizes us for being bad at it is not really good for anyone. And so, you know, I've certainly probably devoted more of my administrative career to that than almost anything over 20 years. But I think it's difficult, as Buck is saying, for a set of really good reasons. And I come back to the fact that, you know, for people who think it has a corrupting influence on the university, I just remind them that putting the technology in the company, if it needs to be in the company, is actually preserving the academic freedom and free inquiry and all the things in the university that we need, rather than keeping it in the university and trying to do some business activity that we're not well suited to doing.
So I'm going to ask one more question, but we're going to then jump to questions from the audience. So if you've got a question, you can raise your hand, and we have a floating mic, and we'll also take some questions that have come in, you know, through the text messages. But we, as you know, at UNC Chapel Hill, we're proud of the fact that high structure active learning is really important here. We've become one of the leaders in this area through support from the AAU. But Chapter 10 talks about problem-based learning and how this is critical for a contemporary curriculum, innovative curriculum.
Yeah, so this class, how many, we still have some left.
Someone got their point and left. Yeah. See y'all later.
This is a class where we have 420 students in 84 teams, with 23 coaches, all volunteer entrepreneurs. And the reason is because we can't teach entrepreneurship from a book. And as you students know, and they all know Holden because we're still using the videos from the MOOC we did, and Holden's in that, so they get a small dose of him. But what they all know is that this is about not just in your head, it's in your heart and your stomach, and it's about failure. And you know, part of what we try to do is to allow people to fail quickly and inexpensively, but the class is actually set up to create a failure or two while they're still here, so they know what that sort of feels like. Because it's not just in here, it's in here as well. And so anybody who's paying attention at all knows that you can't stand up in a class anymore in front of students for an hour and lecture. I mean, you can't compete with YouTube, you can't compete with TEDx's, you can't compete with any of that. And what we did learn from Professor Sarma at MIT was a concept of just-in-time learning, which is like experiential learning, but it's kind of cool, because he says you learn stuff much better if you need to know it, and you learn it at the moment you need to know it in order to solve the problem. And so you're going to a wedding and you have to wear a bow tie, you don't know how to tie a bow tie, you go on YouTube, you learn to tie the bow tie, because you have to. That's a much better way of learning than doing this theoretical stuff and then hoping someday it's going to be relevant. So it's not optional anymore. I mean, I think it's just, we just know more about how people learn, and it's not opening up somebody's brain, pouring something in, stirring it around, and then closing it again.
Yeah, you probably didn't notice, but Kelly Holden is here, and we gave her a shout out in our book.
Right, that Kelly really has time, as you know, because you like it.
Yeah.
No dummy.
I wish I could take credit for hiring her.
Good job supporting
just
her.
trying to keep her here.
Good job
That's
supporting
right,
her.
yeah.
Right.
So
do we have questions?
yeah, questions.
Do you want to start with the computer or out in the audience?
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you say that school isn't worth it without graduating, are you making the case that a degree is more important than education? If you drop out the day before graduation, shouldn't the knowledge you attain be worth it?
Okay, great question. Yeah, so this is probably, at least among other college professors who write in this space, probably the most controversial point that we take, because our colleagues, you know, I just mentioned Kathy Davidson, and she and Chris Newfield, and Sarah Goldrick Rabb, and a lot of the people who are writing in this space who are, I'm so sorry that my dad didn't live to see me say that there was someone to my left. He never would have believed that would be possible. These people who are to our left think that it's a little instrumentalist, that we're saying everybody has to graduate or else college isn't worth it. And of course, if you can get folks to accept that the habits of mind and the things you learn and all of those things are timeless and important, then absolutely the experience that you have getting an education is doing that. The problem is that society has, and again, it's structural and we created the system, penalizes folks who don't have the degree in three ways. One is that they may not achieve, on average, they're not going to achieve the same income levels as people who do finish. The second is that it's likely, again, hard to realize here, but if they went to school somewhere else in the United States, they would have significant debt. And the third is that they have to live with, if they feel badly about themselves for not finishing. And so when you add all of that up, I think it's very hard, at least right now, if we don't correct some of these things, not to take the instrumentalist view of all this.
Please don't drop out the day before you graduate. That's just don't do that.
Yeah.
But I will say this, that one of the things that we get a lot now is it really worth it? And so here's my standard answer. Is it really worth it? Well, tell me about your kids. Well, one went to Brown, and one went to some. The people who say it's not really worth it, they're saying it's not really worth it for somebody else's kids. It's very rare that someone comes and talks to me about, is it worth it, who didn't go to college and whose kids aren't going to college. It's always, is it worth it for somebody else's kids? And I think we have to keep asking the question, is it worth it? Which is what we're doing with the new curriculum, because we want to make it more worth it. And secondly, the new demographic, which we probably don't even have time to get into, but we've got to make it worth it for a whole bunch of different kids who we didn't used to have to make it worth it for.
Yeah, and the same thing obtains when people say something that, in this case, I'm right there with Kathy Davidson and Chris Newfield. When people say college isn't for everyone, the people who say that, their own kids went to college, and they did. And so this whole notion that college isn't for everyone, when we're not equitably distributing the opportunity to go to college, is really something that makes me mad. And we also need to try to educate people to the point where they'll stop saying that, because until everyone has a fair chance to go to college, then saying college isn't for everyone is really a destructive thing to say.
Okay. Next question. How will entrepreneurial programs fend off industry interest to preserve the innovative soul of the curriculum?
Say that again.
Maybe I'll move to the next one. That was kind of a complicated question. Do you think an entrepreneurship class should be a general education requirement at colleges?
Well, I'm a big one for I don't like required. I mean, when I was a student, we were railing against required courses because, who wants, as a professor, who wants kids in your class that are there because they have to take it and don't want to take it? So, I think...
I do. Yeah. I taught general chemistry to 10,000 people. Yeah, some of them actually learned something.
Because they want to go to medical school.
Well, or do something else, but yeah.
So,
that would depend on the curriculum at your particular school. I still believe that it's good to have a structured curriculum that ask students to be exposed to a wide range of things. And so if entrepreneurship works in that, depending on how you framed it, it could. But it doesn't take the place of the humanities and social sciences and natural sciences and mathematics and all of that being offered to folks in a progressive and modern way, but still asking our students to experience all of that. That's part of, we have a whole section in the first part of the book about how important that is.
If I could just add that I think Andy Parents here, who's leading this effort for us in the college, early on in one of the faculty focus meetings, this question was raised: should entrepreneurship be there in the curriculum? And I think there was at least one or two people there that asked the question back: is innovation, entrepreneurship, which I know you two separate, but they're often linked. Is this just a fad, was the question? It's been a buzzword for the past 10, 12 years. Is it here to stay? And I don't know how you'd answer.
Yeah, well, when we were setting all of this up, we definitely got that question a lot. And now here we are 12 years later, and when Buck is teaching this Econ 125 class, this whole place is full. And WashU has a entrepreneurship center that was stood up around the same time, and we're busy feeding that. So I don't think any of that is going away anytime soon, but I think getting back to whether you should require it or not, people are taking it without needing to require it. So why use up a requirement on something that a lot of people are going to do anyway?
But I also think it's a proxy for something else, which I didn't really understand until lately. You understand this well. I think it's a proxy for job readiness, because we have not historically, in general, done as good a job as we could on job readiness. And so many kids will say, I'm a history major, I'm an English major, but my parents say, what are you going to do with an English major? So I say, well, I'm minoring in entrepreneurship, which allows them to be an English major or a history major. But it also gives them some skills that will help them probably more with their first job than their last job, because for the last job, the English major, what they learn as an English major may be helpful. So I think it is standing in a way, as a proxy for something else that we really have to get busy on. And I know you believe this deeply, which is we need to do both and, not either or. We need to give people a great liberal education, and we need to be sure that kids are ready for the workplace when they graduate, because that's what, back to the expectations. When they come here, that's what they and their parents expect. I don't know if you hear that, but that's certainly what we hear.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't talked that much about this tonight, but we have a whole chapter about how important career services is. And even Chris Newfield, when we said, we thought we were going to get a juicy quote from him about how this was all a pecuniary conspiracy, neoliberal conspiracy. And when we asked him, do you think we need to do a good job at career services? He said, yes, we're on the hook. So somebody like him who comes at this obviously as a sort of faculty critic of higher education, after examining everything, believes that we've made a promise to the public that we're going to do a good job preparing students to do something when they graduate. And just think, if we did it well, then we wouldn't have to have students doing one major for themselves and one for their parents. I mean, I hate that when somebody says, and incidentally, our daughter is theater and sociology, so she knows she doesn't have to do anything for us. Yeah. But so many kids will say, yeah, I'm a double major in theater and accounting. And nothing against accounting, but I'm guessing that if somebody wants to be a theater major, that it's not so likely that they would choose accounting. And so if we could get better career services, we could let that take care of what we're now filling in with the curriculum, which to me is a huge loss.
Yeah, but it's counterintuitive, but it may be the case that the best thing we could do for the liberal arts is improve our career services. The single best thing we could do. So that we could say essentially, we have your back, you can be a history major, you can be an English major, and we'll support you in that, and we'll do the things that we need to do beginning freshman year to make sure that you have a job also. It could have really incredible impact on everything that we do.
I know Jack's just dying to hand that mic to someone.
Yeah, has anybody got a question they want to verbalize as opposed to textualize?
We still have a lot coming in.
Okay.
All right.
Based on your research and writing the book, what do y'all believe could improve the completion rate nationally for college?
Oh, yeah. So it's another hard thing
Great
to
question.
conceptualize if you're at UNC, which has a 90% graduation rate, which is, there may be one or two other public universities that are that high, but there aren't very many. Most of the public universities, the regional public universities in particular, but even public flagships, have completion rates that are below 60%. And some of that is because they're serving populations that don't have as many resources behind them to finish. But if you look at some of those schools that have really decided to emphasize this, like Georgia State, and in Florida, the University of Central Florida and the University of South Florida, those schools are huge, and they have 70, 80,000 students, and they've been able to get their completion rates up north of 70%. Well, just think about what it means for America to have a school like Georgia State with 70, or UCF, I know, has 70,000 students, and 65,000 of them are undergraduates, and 70% of those students are graduating with a degree, and something crazy like 30% of them are Pell eligible, which means they're the lowest income. So UCF is graduating more Pell eligible undergraduates than the entire Ivy League put together. And so it's not correct for schools like that to say, well, there's too many intangibles against us, we can't graduate everybody. And so it has to be an institutional priority. And in my opinion, we would be better off if we had more universities that are truly research universities, and some that are kind of in between that didn't get as involved in research until they met certain objectives with regard to their undergraduate completion rate. Yeah, Lloyd. Somebody give Lloyd the mic.
I have two questions about perhaps the instrumentalist argument that is embedded in your project. One, I just wonder if you could say something about community colleges, because you put so much stress on four-year degrees, and I know there's a huge number of students around the country who gain a whole lot from 2 years. That's just one thing. But more generally, although you have said that the liberal arts and the humanities and the arts are important, how would you make the case for that argument to people who are willing to see a partnership, but see the partnership primarily as a scientific, a medical research, or a technical services? Why are the liberal arts, the humanities, and the social sciences essential to the partnership you described?
Yeah, great. So as far as the community colleges are concerned, yeah, we didn't go too deeply into all that. One of the things that's challenging about the community college system is that that's where the completion rates are quite low. So I think, that if the community colleges are really going to add to all of this, I think, giving them the resources that they need to get their completion rates up would be a great investment for every state. And if we didn't sound like we would be in favor of that, then we didn't do what we set out to do. Now, as far as how the humanities and social sciences inform this partnership, yeah, I guess the point we were hoping to make was that if we can accept the fact that the public is expecting these things that we elaborated, then that will give us more freedom to expand the public's view about what's important about higher education. And we've committed a sin because we've allowed, and again, it's over 70 years and there's no one group of people who are responsible of this. We've allowed the public's sense of what the expectations are to narrow. And we don't think that we're going to expand them, you know, different from a lot of our colleagues who are also writing. I mean, as Carol says, a lot of people write these books after they retire, and they sometimes have suggestions that are very hard to do. I write books knowing my colleagues are going to read them, and I'm going to have to explain whether I want to do them or not. But you know, we're not going to get. We're assuming colleges and universities are going to stay more or less like they are now. That we're not going to have the internet suddenly destroy all of higher education like some people thought it was going to. And you know, I'm sure historians of higher education could go back through history and point to many cycles like that. So if they're going to keep going like they're going, then we're going to have to reverse this process by which, you know, the perception of universities is narrowed too much gradually. We're not going to just suddenly flip a switch and have a whole bunch of people suddenly agree when after 70 years of being told by university administrators and politicians who are sympathetic to higher education that these are the things that we're going to do, but they're not going to suddenly change their mind about all of that in one go. So again, that's an incremental strategy, but that's kind of been our philosophy with regard to a lot of these things. And we think if you don't do it that way, you're just going to continue to have this further and further narrowing that's going to go on.
So Kevin, I know we've got people with other things on their schedule. We also have some food and something to drink upstairs, just on the balcony right above us here, where the balloons are, right, Warner? Where the balloons are?
They'll lead you up and around. It's in the Genomics Cafe, one floor up.
Let's take one more question from Warren.
Oh, perfect.
You've been sitting there.
No pressure.
The next good one.
Yes. What metric should entrepreneurial program successes be measured upon?
Oh, great. We just were talking about that today. So they shouldn't be measured by how many companies we start or how much. I mean, it's nice to show that new companies are started and that economic development, but we're about teaching, and what we really are about is helping to instill an entrepreneurial mindset into students from all walks of life. And you know, someone may learn the entrepreneurial mindset and 20 years later do something related to that, but I think we make a mistake, and it's part of why we wrote this book, is in losing sight of our main mission, which is teaching. And entrepreneurship and innovation and creativity are essential parts of a higher education. In some ways, we're just another vehicle, entrepreneurship, to do that. But I think we really err if we forget that what we're ultimately about, whether it's entrepreneurship or history or English, is, you know, a higher education. And that's really the higher calling that reason that we're all here, I think.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I get the last question.
Sure.
What's the theme and title of the next book?
Yes. Well, Buck has said that he's not going to do another one, so if we're going to do one together, I'm going to have to come up with something really good, which I don't have yet. So far, the people who've read it who have said and we didn't really touch on this that much, but we just scratched the surface on academic medicine. We debated whether to include that chapter. Mostly I said we should, and Buck kept trying to talk me out of it. But we just felt that, or I felt, and I eventually convinced Buck of this, that when it's, you know, at a school like this, it's 2/3 of your budget or something like that. Why wouldn't you talk about the part of the university that's 2/3 of the budget? And I think particularly the faculty in academic affairs and a lot of trustees who come on, you know, are focused on their undergraduate experience and, you know, I can remember having board meetings where, you know, every event, Bill Roper and I decided that at least once a year he should come try to explain something to the trustees. But, you know, if we didn't kind of force that, it was hard for that to happen. And I think, you know, universities are making a big mistake, and faculty who aren't thinking about the whole university are making a big mistake by not understanding all of that, because, I mean, going back to Lloyd's point, I mean, it could eventually just become 100% of the university budget, and that would be a bad thing, and it's also not respectful of them that we want to understand what they're doing. So a lot of my medical school colleagues have said something like, well, you know, you read the book and I loved your academic medicine chapter, and so many people need to understand this, and will you do another book about
I
that?
think you and Kevin did.
There you go.
Carol gives me some release time, maybe I can.
So I do want to say that there is a community of people on our campus who are beginning to continue this conversation. We've had actually one short meeting already, and we continue to want to do that. So if there are any of you in the audience, some of you we've already talked, who want to join that, we'll continue to send me an email and we'll keep you in the loop, because this book we hope is the beginning, not the end of something. And we think there is some important conversations that you all need to be part of, and we also intend to try to have people not just like us as part of that conversation as well. But thanks to all of you for coming, and I hope you can stick around to at least say hello afterwards, a little reception.
Thank you all. Great to see you.